Hello and welcome to today's CUGC User Share. I'm Stephanie Boozer with CUGC HQ, and I am happy to welcome you all here with us today to hear about the future of applications and deployments. Presenting for us today is Timothy Mangan. In addition to being a leader of our Boston CUGC local group, he is a CTP fellow, and he is also the founder of TM Urgent Technologies. But before I hand things over to Tim, I'm going to introduce our moderator. He is another CTP, Sam Jacobs. Sam has moderated many webinars for us, so he is quite familiar with the process, and we're happy to have him back with us today. Sam's the Director of Technology Development at IPM, and he will keep an eye on the question box. Would you like to say hello, Sam?
Sure. Thank you, Stephanie. Hello, everybody. If anybody has any questions, there is a question box, and we will try to get them answered as soon as possible. If we don't get to all of the questions, not to worry. They will be sent to Tim after the webinar, and we will do our best to get them out to you.
That's great. So, yep, put your questions in as you have them, and he'll try to get to those, and some we may save to the end, like he said. Also want to let you guys know the presentation is being recorded, so you will receive a link to the recording via email tomorrow afternoon. And with that, I'm going to hand things straight over to Tim to get us started. Tim, I am sending you the screen right now.
All righty. Thank you, Stephanie, and thank you, Sam, for doing the moderation here. Let me know when you see my screen.
We can see it. You want to go into presenter mode. Yep, there we go.
Yep. I like my new title. Oh, I can see your.
I didn't know what to call you.
GoToWebinar control panel too.
You may want to collapse that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that's visible. Sorry.
Yeah.
There we go. How's that?
Okay.
All right, so what we're going to talk about here in the next hour is about some things that are happening from Microsoft that's going to have a huge impact on your companies and how you deploy applications and desktops in the future. Before we get started, Stephanie, can we throw up that poll? I've got a real quick poll here that I want to use to sort of tune where I spend my time here today.
Yep, it's going.
If I do this, do I get to see results? No.
I think when I close it, I can show the results and you should see them,
Okay.
but if you don't, let me know. Got about 70% voted in about 30 seconds. So how about in just another few seconds? All right, I think we're good. Share results. Can you see that, Tim?
No, I do not.
So you have roughly 50-50. So 55% basic info and 45% really deep technical dive.
Okay, so that was totally unhelpful. Okay, no problem. So we'll go ahead and I'll try to meet the needs of everybody here. And give you an idea here about what's coming down the road, why you need to care about it, why you don't necessarily need to act on it right away. And I'll try to give you a peek look at the way it looks under the covers here a little bit. So if we take a look at what Microsoft has done over the years, we go back into the early days of DOS and Windows. They were successful as a company by winning over the developers from the older model of application development, which at that point was largely in the Unix world. And developers in the Unix world lived in a very bifurcated mode where they would develop software, but even though they wanted to run under various forms of Unix, everyone's Unix was specific to their hardware. So HP had their form, actually HP had two forms of Unix. Sun Microsystems had theirs, digital computer. They had their own, everyone had their own special form. And so the developers had to build a product and then port it over to every one of these platforms to be able to get access to a wide market out there. And every time they released the product, they had to go through that process again. And Windows came along, and Microsoft's promise was that you were going to be able to run on anybody's hardware. This is really IBM's promise, but you'd be able to run on anyone's hardware to this generic hardware set that they set up. And so developers could build their program and it would run across a wide variety of things. And this is really how Microsoft won the developers over, which then made their platform so much more powerful because all of the applications were available. So in the late 1990s, Sun Microsystems came out with Java. And that was a challenge to the Microsoft dominance, because what Java did is it said, hey, this is good that you can run on all this hardware, but it's only Windows. Mr. Developer, if you write to Java, you can write it once and it will run everywhere. It'll run on Windows and it'll run on all of these Unix things or Apple operating systems. Anything that's out there will make it run. And that was a promise to Java, and it won over a lot of developers. Now, they were able to do that because they took the concept of having a product that's delivered in a compiled form for a particular processor, and they said, no, we're going to deliver it in source form, and we'll compile it on the fly as users run the applications. And so they were willing to take the performance hit to do that. And they got over a lot of converts from the developers. Microsoft decided that they would respond to that. And starting in 2000, and it really kind of came out in 2002, was .NET, which was Microsoft's answer to Java. One of the problems that Java had, and Microsoft realized this very, very early on, was that every time Sun would change the runtime environment, the JRE, they would break a lot of Java applications. And so the concept of write once, run everywhere wasn't really true. You could run on all these different operating systems, but you needed to be tied to the particular Java version in many cases. So as they went from 1.3 to 1.4, your application might not work with a 1.4 runtime. So you need to release a new version, and that new version probably doesn't work on 1.3. And this was really the big problem for Java over the years, until we got into all the security things later on, which has really kind of destroyed Java as a platform these days. So Microsoft came out with .NET as their solution to that. And what they did is they provided side-by-side capability for that runtime. So you could have a .NET 1.0 runtime and a 2.0 runtime and a 3.5 runtime and a 4 runtime, all on the machine at the same time. And programs that were targeted to one particular runtime will get that runtime no matter if the other ones are on there or not. And that was very successful for them. And it worked pretty well. We have most of the applications that I see out in the enterprise, a lot of them are based with .NET with WinForms, particularly a lot of the in-house applications that you've built within your own company. WinForms continues even today to be a very popular way to develop those applications. They came out with WPF a little while later, which was different, a different UI on top of the .NET base, and was really a little more flexible. It makes it easier to build programs that adapt to different screen sizes and different DPI and things like that. So those are kind of the two popular forms that we have for applications that are being deployed in the enterprise today. Now, in 2012, they came out with AppX. So all of this that we've had prior to AppX was built on the Windows API, meaning the programmer would write to a particular API. And Microsoft has been very, very good at maintaining compatibility along that API over the years. So up to the end of Windows XP, pretty much anything that had ever been written for Windows would work on Windows XP. There were very few exceptions to that. They were very good at the compatibility. They did break a bunch of that compatibility going to Vista, just because at that point, it had been 15 years and there were some programming practices that just didn't make sense anymore, and they needed to kind of eliminate those. I'll give you an example of one of the things they eliminated. They thought this wouldn't cause any problems at all. There was an API call for an application to be able to ask for memory, where it would ask for all the memory on the box. This API actually went back to the days of DOS. Now in DOS, when you had an application, it was the only thing running. There was no competing applications. So it kind of made sense, particularly in a very limited memory scenario, for that application to say, hey, give me whatever memory is available so I can run. That API still works on Windows XP. Microsoft decided that that was a bad thing. And so they made that API continue to exist, but it just fails. It says, nope, you can't have the memory. You know, they thought, yeah, there's probably a couple of old crusty apps that'll have a problem with that, but we don't want those apps around anymore. It turned out there were a whole bunch of apps that were making that call and nobody was aware of it. So eventually they had to put in compatibility shim. So if you've ever gone to an application that says run like you're on Windows XP, that's one of the shims that comes in place and it helps fix those problems. So instead of just saying, I'll give you all the memory or I'm not going to give you anything, you put that shim in place that says, oh, well, I'll give you something reasonable. And that seems to satisfy the applications and made them work. When AppX came out, AppX uses a very different runtime. It was a break. Microsoft decided, among other things, they wanted to be able to have a clean API to start over from so that they didn't have to continue to carry this legacy API around forever. They also wanted an API that would run on more than just Windows. They're taking a page out of what Java was thinking about. And so they call the base framework for this Windows .NET Core is what the name they use now for it. But this is a portable version of the .NET platform. And so they've released a version that runs on Windows, but it also has one that runs on iOS and one that runs on Android. And if Windows Phone was a thing, I'm sure we'd have a Windows Phone version of it as well. AppX was this new programming model, and they tried to get developers to go there. One of the main reasons they wanted to do that is they started losing developers in the gaming market who would develop games on the iOS platform, and they wanted to bring them back. And so they built this promise that you could build with AppX, and it'll run on these various platforms, and the only thing you're going to have to worry about are physical device constraints. So screen sizes are different. You know, the UI you put together for someone running an app on a phone is very different than on a desktop. So you're going to worry about those types of things and touch versus mouse. But other than that, your code will work. This was a great promise, but unfortunately, because we didn't have the Windows API, it was not useful for enterprise applications. And so the only thing that we see out in that space, for the most part, are games or very small applications that are probably cloud-based applications. The bulk of the software that ISVs develop for enterprises and enterprises are developing in-house are not AppX today, and it just didn't work. Microsoft came out with something called Project Centennial. Later, they renamed it as Bridges for Windows Desktop Apps or something like that. And Centennial was based on AppX, but it was to encourage software vendors to start moving towards AppX. And so they could take the bulk of their source code, make a few source code changes, and put it into this new format, and it would kind of work kind of half as an AppX program and half as a Windows program. That program wasn't terribly successful because not enough of the Windows API was supported. They came back with a second shot at that, and it really didn't work very well. And Msix is Microsoft's latest attempt, I kind of call it Plan D, on how to modernize applications and move forward. And this time, they're probably going to be a much more successful than they've been in the past. So what is Msix? Well, it's a couple of things. It's a replacement for the MSI format. Microsoft intends the MSI to go away. That technology was built in the 1990s. Not a lot has been added to it. And certainly things like custom actions in MSIs are just a pain for everybody involved. And we need something better. They also want to improve upon the delivery model of how you bring applications in. And so they've got this concept they refer to as modern apps. And yes, you can think about it as putting apps up in the Windows Store, but it's really much more than that. It's just a different way of delivering the applications in a nice, clean way that you can add them into a system and remove them from a system. And the system is still in a very stable state. They don't want to be in a mode where you have to wipe out the OS every once in a while just to get a clean version of Windows. The applications should be able to come and go, and the operating system should be nice and clean afterwards. In terms of the implementation piece, it's a new type of container that software will run in. And I'll talk about that a little bit more, but it'll have better API support than what we've had in Centennial or AppX so far. So when I talk about Msax, I talk about being both a format and the runtime. And they're kind of targeting both developers and Windows IT pros to do this. Now, inside of Microsoft, I got to tell you, ever since Steve Ballmer left, Microsoft has really kind of turned in as they try to develop new products and ideas. I really don't feel they're listening to the field as much as they were 10 years ago. And we can kind of see some of this come out. And sometimes Microsoft kind of believes their own bullshit, quite frankly. And we kind of got to watch out for that as part of the process here. They have some concepts here. They think everything should be a service and that you want to purchase everything through services. And I'm not sure they're right about that. Certainly there are some trends in that way, but it's not an absolute. And internally, as a lot of the people I talk with in Microsoft, they really believe this, that everything needs to be a service. That's the way that the world is going, and everyone wants things to be services. They do want to get out from that 30 plus years now of the legacy of the Windows API. And they're hoping this is a way that will help them do that safely, that they can continue to modernize the operating system, but the applications will be able to come right along. And they want this lightweight delivery model to be a change in the future as well. When they always want to talk about how the MSI format stinks, how Windows apps get added into a computer and it just clogs things up and your computer gets slower and slower over time, and they want to eliminate that. When they talk to developers, this is kind of the spiel they're giving to developers. It's a slightly different spiel to them. And right now it's really saying, hey, you didn't like what we did so far, but trust us, this time we're going to get it right. Because they really want the developers and those independent software vendors to deliver products out in this new MSIX format. They want the MSI to go away. It's going to take some time to do that, but that's the direction that they want to go. And it's really not a bad thing. When they talk to IT people, it's a slightly different pitch. And this is kind of the pitch that they give. They say, hey, when developers look at the way software gets consumed in the enterprise, they have a view that looks like what you see on the screen right now. Someone makes a request, somebody somewhere gets that software and it gets put out there. And it looks in a nice, simple process. But of course, that that's not the process that you use, right? Your process probably looks something like what's on the screen now. It's got a lot of steps in there. It's a lot of work involved. And as you go from one operating system to another, having to go through your 300, 500, 1,000, 3,000 applications and go through this process with every single application is time consuming and very expensive for you. And so what they want to do is to have a model that looks more like this for you, where a request comes in, you do some very simple customization to that application, and you deploy it out. And if the vendor upgrades that application, or Microsoft upgrades the operating system, you can take those changes that you made during that repackaging and just apply them again, and it will work. It'll be a very, very simple process for you. So that's their pitch. To go back to this screen though, I think this screen right now is wrong. This is the model that everybody used to go from Windows XP to Windows 7. And enterprises spent a lot of energy touching every one of their applications to get through that process. And it was necessary to do that because they broke so many applications during that time. As enterprises started talking to me about going from Windows 7 to Windows 10, almost invariably, they were talking to me about going through this same process again. And I tried to caution them that I don't think you need to do that. I think that Windows 10 compatibility with Windows 7 for an application standpoint is going to be so good that you can skip this process, spend all of your energy on figuring out the differences in how you deploy and manage and service that operating system, because the operating system base was very different from that standpoint. The applications are pretty much going to work. If you've got 1,000 applications and they're all working on Windows 7, there's only going to be a small handful probably that you have any problems with Windows 10. So rather than go through all of this effort on every single application, do some spot testing, deploy out, and just deal with the problems when they come. Now, most of the enterprises I talked to didn't really do that. They still kind of went through a process like this, but they did a lightweight version of that. But there are a few that did, and quite frankly, they're very happy that they did. They saved a lot of time and energy. And I think that's kind of the new model going forward, particularly as Windows is being updated on a very regular basis. You might not keep up with the releases that happen every 6 months. In fact, it's sort of strange. There was a new post out just an hour ago, I noticed, that Microsoft has changed their servicing policy. And they're saying that for Windows 10, the fall releases, they're going to give 18 months instead of the 6 months that they were giving before in terms of the support level on that. So you get a year and a half now. 18? No, it wasn't 18. I think it was 20. But anyway, it's extended from where it was. So even Microsoft is realizing you're probably going to want to go for a fall release, and then every 2 years update that thing to all of your desktops for a lot of the larger enterprises. Okay. So let me catch you up on some of the stuff that we've been doing lately with AppV, because AppV is kind of not necessarily a competitor, but maybe the predecessor to Msix in some fashion. AppV, from a feature development standpoint, really hasn't had any new features added in a while, and so all of the new things that have been happening externally. And I've been spending a lot of time building tooling to help the process of getting AppV packaging to be as smooth as possible and as easy as possible for the enterprises to get as many applications through that process as they can. So to do that, we do use some tools. I have a free tool that's called AppV Manage. And we typically use that shortly after packaging up the application to do some initial tests. And I'll talk about some of the things that I've extended along that as well. I've got another free tool, it's called Passive Install. And this is just a simple PowerShell framework for someone that wants to have a complete silent install and customize the application, but they don't want to go through the process of actually repackaging into a new MSI. It provides a very simple way to do all of the common things that you want to do from a PowerShell standpoint, but it's much easier to do it. So there are things like if you want to add a registry value into the registry, if you try to do that PowerShell, you first have to check and make sure that all of the keys exist first before you add the item in. Well, this just gives you a simple PowerShell command that says, hey, add this item in, and it does the job in the background of figuring out, does it need to create those keys? So it's a lot of simple things like that. And then the last thing is this TM Edit tool. That one's not a free tool, but that one kind of helps us improve that process a little further. And that's something new that came out here within the last 6 months. So people are just kind of getting started with that one. The focus of all of the energy that I've been putting into that type of tooling is to help enterprises understand applications better. As part of that last year, I did write a book called The Application Book, and it was designed for someone who is going to be doing some type of packaging operation, whether it's MSI repackaging or AppV packaging, or they're doing app layering. But it's there to provide the kind of information that you need to understand what it is the installer is doing. So when you see the installer put some stuff in the registry here, some files in here, why are they doing that? And this breaks it down and ties that information back to the Windows API. Well, they're doing it because they want to put a file type association in place, or a shell extension in place, or they're implementing some COM objects over here. That's the purpose of understanding the applications in this fashion.
It says your screen is not showing.
I was just told my screen is not showing.
It looks fine. I can see it fine, Tim.
Okay, never mind. That's good to hear. All right, so this is a shot of the analyzer that's built into that free AppV Manage tool. And so what we do is we have you install the product, we get the capture, and then we analyze the contents in there, and then we break it down into the various types of Windows APIs that are being utilized by this package, and provide other information that you might not be aware of. It's amazing how little enterprises often know about the applications that they're being asked to package up and deliver out to desktops. And so maybe it interfaces with Word, maybe it interfaces with the browsers. Maybe there's a device driver, as in this case. And if we're doing with AppV, we have to worry about that device driver. Maybe I need it, maybe I don't. This package happened to be Snagit. The device driver in Snagit, nobody actually uses, so it wasn't really a problem. But if you didn't know it was in there, it could be a problem for you, so you want to be aware of that up front. The work that I did about a year ago was all around this button right here, the installer fix-ups. So in addition to looking at the package and providing you information, what that button would do is provide you some PowerShell scripts that you go back and repackage this and get a better package. And so it would solve problems that were AppV specific, or it would solve problems that the vendor didn't do the right type of support for things that they should have done. Like maybe they changed the path variable and they really should be using the new app paths method to do that. Maybe they don't have the file association set so that the user can set and choose their own file type when you have file type conflict. So there are things like that that we would just fix up. Maybe the package, a lot of the MSI installers you get from vendor, if they give you an EXE and an MSI version, the EXE version will compile all of the .NET stuff and provide optimization. Quite often the MSI one doesn't. So we would catch that and say, okay, we'll make that stuff get compiled for you. And so this would give you a PowerShell script, uses that passive install that I mentioned, and you would just go back and resequence the package, do the install the way you did before, run this one script, and then your new package will have all of those problems fixed. And so that's the process we've been using. The new tool, TM Edit, kind of takes out the middleman. So it does the same type of analysis, but instead of having to go back and resequence, it just fixes the package directly. And I think we're going to see a lot more success in packaging with this type of tooling, that we can just kind of quickly go through, fix up all the problems, and get a package which works better than the vendor delivered it, is customized the way you want it, and is as optimized as it possibly can be. And that's kind of been the direction we've been doing with AppV. Now, as I talk to enterprises, particularly the Citrix customers, they tend to be the larger enterprises that are out there. One of the things I noticed a couple of years ago was all of this parallelism going on. They would have different teams deploying the same application using different technologies. Some people putting in the image, maybe pushing out through Config Manager, the Citrix team doing it through AppV, or maybe they were getting into app layering and doing it there. And they would take the same application and go through completely different processes being done by different people who probably aren't even talking to each other and aren't sharing the knowledge of what they learned in dealing with this application across the board. I wrote an article up on Tech Target about a year and a half ago now, and it kind of looked like this. And I proposed that our industry should work towards a new model that looks more like this, where the enterprise can bring in the application, use one good common set of tooling, produce that customized package, and then from there branch off to the different ways that this thing gets deployed. And if we were able to achieve this, we could be far more efficient, particularly in those larger enterprises. And when I wrote it, I said, hey, you know, looking at what's out there, the AppV format is actually the closest thing to Nirvana that we have out there. It's not perfect. We would probably want to have something a little different, but it's a really good model for what we ought to do. Now, I could claim victory and say that, oh, Microsoft must have read my white paper and they must have listened to me and they gave us Msix because that's what this is. Reality is, I'm sure Microsoft didn't. They already had plans in place and we're all just kind of thinking about the same things at the same time. But this is a way that we could possibly view Msix as well. So what will MSI replace from my standpoint? It is going to replace MSI installers. I believe it's going to replace application virtualization for a lot of packages. I also believe that there's going to be a bunch of packages we're still going to need AppV for. It's probably going to replace application layering. We'll have to see how that one goes. The concept of getting something into a layer and ingesting the the MSIX into the layer probably does continue to make sense, and that's where those products would continue to live. And user environment management products, for the portions of those that are kind of redirecting data to get it in the right place for applications, if we do our job right with MSIX, we really don't need that functionality as a separate product anymore. we'll be taking care of that at the application layer, even for those old legacy applications, because we'll fix it as part of the MSI packaging process. Stephen Wick, who is the program manager for this program at Build, as well as John V, separately, both made statements kind of like they're on the screen here, where they were saying very clearly to the customer base, hey, don't stop what you're doing with AppV. Even if you're just starting to get into AppV right now, yes, we're doing this stuff with MSIX, but it's going to take a while to get it out there. They haven't given us real hard dates, but they've said, 2 or 3 releases is likely before they actually finish everything. So we'll see it come out in pieces. But they're saying, yeah, go ahead with AppV. You're going to learn so much about your applications, and you're going to be better prepared. We'll provide tooling to take your AppV packages and turn them into MSIS packages for you. So don't stop what you're doing today. Keep things moving. All right, let me do a time check here. Okay, so the MSIX is going to be running in a container. So container is kind of an overloaded term these days. This is a slide that Microsoft uses for the Windows Server containers. So that's the Docker-like stuff that they're doing up in there. The container that they use for the server-based computing is also involved in the Windows desktop. It's part of your Windows desktop now. And AppX applications are actually running in a container today. Now you can often see this if you ever go into the task manager and add a column to the task manager in the detail view called job ID. If you see a task that has a job ID, chances are that means it's running in a container. And it's not 100% because jobs could be used for other things. But for the most part, everything that you see with a job ID is actually running in a container. So all the AppX stuff is running in a container. When AppV a while back had the containerized registry, AppV was running in a container as well. That's part of the reason that they had to turn that back off, because it caused some problems for us in AppV. And we'll see the MSIX stuff running in these containers as well. The idea of a container is it provides some level of isolation. Now, what that means depends on the implementer of that container, but usually there's some isolation involved. There's the protection of assets itself, that they can't get changed and modified during the runtime directly. And resources are constrained so that things running in one container can't cause performance issues to things running in other containers. And possibly it can get constructed in layers. So you have your basic operating system that the container is built against in terms of your assets, and then you just kind of layer it on. You don't have to bring the entire operating system. It's just the bits you need for that application itself, and it'll layer right in place. And you could potentially build these things up in layers. Now, the word container is that we should think of it as a generic term and not a specific implementation. The stuff that we did with AppV over the years, we used the term bubble because containers wasn't a cool word at that point. Bubble probably was never really a cool word either, but so what? But we really can consider AppV to be a form of this container as well. Citrix had their Citrix streaming. They call it isolation environments. Symantec had, from the SVS, I don't remember what they called it. Unidesk had layering. These are all forms of containers if you use that in a generic term. And what Microsoft is really doing for the containers with MSIX is they're extending out what isolation means. So they're allowing more and more things to happen in the container that currently for an AppX process just plain isn't allowed. When we look at the formats of these things, you'll see that there's a heck of a lot of similarity as well. AppV was actually, in the version 5 of AppV, was built on top of AppX. And so it uses an AppX base and it has an extension to it. When Microsoft did Centennial, they used AppX and they did a different extension to it, a much smaller one. And MSIX is built the same way. And in terms of size of extension, I kind of drew it in here the way it works. But in all of these formats, what you can really get is you've got a zip compressed file. You've got a bunch of ingredients in it, which would be the files and a virtual registry file for what would be the registry associated with the application, an XML manifest file called appxmanifest.xml, and then some additional metadata files that are necessary for the housekeeping. This is a slide out of Build where they kind of compared the format of AppV and MSIX. And I'm actually going to bring up, let me use the mouse. This is an MSIX package that I've opened up. So I just kind of copied it and renamed it to .zip and opened it up. I couldn't save this package, it would be bad at that point. But just so we can look around, we can see, those of you who are familiar with AppV will see this looks very familiar, right? We got a set of files, we've got a registry.dat file. We actually have 3 DAT files here. This registry.dat is the HK local machine portion. This is the HK current user portion, and this is the classes portion in here. We also have this folder called VFS. Those of you from AppV would be very familiar with that, and then you'll see that there are variabilized folder names under there as well. So those represent other areas of the package that are in there. And then we have this manifest file, and if I open it up, those of you who are familiar with AppV should immediately recognize a couple of things. Number one, we've got an awful lot more schema definitions involved for MSIX, but the package itself, the rest of it is really small at this point. The schemas allow for a ton of information in here, but the packages we're generating right now are just doing the very, very basics, which is basically shortcuts. Okay, so how are you going to get MSIX packages? Well, it's going to happen in a couple of different ways. Number one, the software vendors should start providing them eventually. It'll be really interesting to see how Microsoft is able to convince the vendors to go with MSIX at this point. We really don't have a good feeling for how well that's going to work out. Microsoft probably has a better idea than I do because they're talking to those ISVs directly. And I'm hoping that at Ignite at the end of this month, beginning of October, I'll be able to talk to a number of the software vendors and partners that Microsoft has out there to try to get a better feeling for how well they're going to support MSIX. But the idea is that they will deliver you MSIX, and then you will do some customization using a tool, possibly like the MSIX packaging tool that Microsoft's providing, but possibly also from a third-party vendor that'll be supporting MSIX for the same type of people you're using today. So this would be the Flexeras, the app installers. Over in Europe, I don't remember the name of that other company right now. But there's a whole bunch of them out there that are lining up. In fact, they're falling all over each other this summer to tell you they have MSIX support today, which is kind of laughable at the face of it. But they're getting themselves ready. They've got some things. It's not stuff that you're going to use to push out to production these days, but it's a start. It's a process. If you want to be bleeding edge, it can be kind of interesting. For those applications that you have that you don't get the MSIX for, you're going to be able to create your own. So there is an MSIX packaging tool. We're looking at pre-release versions of it now, so it's in its infancy, and it gives you an experience that's kind of like the AppV sequencer, where you're going to take a clean VM, install capture, and do some editing and produce your package. So you'll be able to take something that has an MSI or EXE installer, or just write your own script type of installer, and to be able to do that capture and get it put out into an MSIX format. There'll also be third-party tooling, I'm sure, available to help you with this process as well. But you're going to need this for your in-house applications. You're going to need it for all of those installers that you have that the vendor isn't going to update. I mean, when I go out to an enterprise and we look at their application mix, there's probably 10% of their applications that the installer is 10 years old. And most of the time, that isn't going to change. Those are applications that they're just going to use the way they are until they die. This will give you an opportunity to take those, repackage into MSIX, so you can use some of the more modern delivery techniques that'll be coming out in the future. If you want to see the packaging tool, let me go. Well, let me just go here. I happen to know Rory's on the webcast, so he'll be happy that I went here. This is Rory Monahan's blog, and he's got a screenshot capture that shows you exactly how you use the MSIX packaging tool. I'm not going to bother to do that here, but basically you're going to start up the tool, tell it you want to do a package. You're going to give it an installer. You're going to give it a certificate at some point as well. Not sure just what happened there. I think I clicked when I shouldn't have. But after you give the installer, you'll go ahead and either do it on the VM you're on or an external VM in the future. Provide some additional information, turn off some services, and then you'll just run your install. And you'll get the capture, you'll customize the application the way you want. And then at one point, you'll be given an opportunity to put in shims that's not actually working in the tool set that's released out in the public right now. And I'll talk about shims a little bit more later. And then you save your package off and you're done. So it's a very simple process to go through to create that package. You may have to do some things with capabilities. For most of the packages that you're going to be doing this stuff to, you don't need to worry about these capabilities. But if you had some software that wanted to be able to read from the contacts, these capabilities have to be declared as part of the packaging, or the runtime isn't going to allow the software to get at the contacts on the system. So, this is the kind of thing that you see anytime you install an app on your phone. You get these capabilities that you have to approve that they have access to things. It's the same kind of concept here. All right. So the real question, as far as I'm concerned, for how successful Msix will be this chart right here. If we take a look at the Windows API and all of the things that are in it, and we look at the things that AppV supports from the Windows API, it's most of that Windows API. There are a few things in there like drivers, Com+, Windows scheduled task. I mean, just very few odd things at the end there that AppV doesn't directly support. But it does a pretty good job of supporting the applications that use the Windows API out there. Centennial didn't work out very well because it really supported just a small set of that API, and that was the real issue. Msix will be supporting more of the Windows API. If you listen to what Kevin Gallo said at the Windows Developer Conference, he seemed to imply that Msix was going to cover the complete Windows API. I do not believe that that's going to be true. I mean, he didn't say those words, but that was kind of the implication. It's going to be a subset. I think it's going to be a subset less than AppV, and that's where I feel that we'll put as much as we can through Msix, but we're still going to use technologies like AppV to deliver some of the applications that we have for years to come. If I break down the Windows API in these 4 different areas, I've kind of color coded here how well I think Msix is going to support these various areas. I think for things in data, they're going to do a good job, although we have some issues at the moment in the early version builds. Interfaces out to the end users will be pretty good. The one that's in that area that I suspect we end up never getting is things like shell extensions. Now, for Citrix customers doing published applications, you don't even care about those, so that's okay. But for desktop deliveries, that could be a big deal for some enterprises and some applications. Interfaces to the operating system, that's a mixed bag, right? We're going to get shortcuts and file associations and protocol handlers, but a bunch of the other things that AppV exposes out are really going to be kept inside the package, and they're not going to be available to you. Interfaces to other applications is one area that totally gets cut off when it comes to running in a container like Msix. AppX apps don't work together. If you need to have a couple of apps working together, you need to have the first app dump some data out to a file and have the second one come and read it somewhere. And that's kind of the way it's going to be with Msix. So if we have apps that need to work together, kind of the way we do connection groups in AppV, with Msix, it really looks like you're going to need to bundle all of those apps that need to work together in a single Msix package. You'll be able to do that just fine, but you're going to have to do that work to put the pieces together and build your Msix, and then you'll be able to deliver it out, and those pieces will be able to work together.
Tim?
Yes.
Sam, so 2 questions. Are there going to be any changes from AppX to Msix with regards to certificate signing?
Are there going to be any changes from AppX to Msix? I believe the answer is probably, so what they mean by that question, no. Msix does have you sign the package very much like you do with the AppX packages. to ingest an MSIX package on a Windows machine. If it's not signed, the only way you can do that is to turn the machine on in developer mode, which of course you're not really going to do in production purposes.
Right.
So it's the same kind of thing. You know, is that a real certificate? I mean, with what Microsoft did with AppX, I mean, if you actually like put things up into the store, it's sort of weird. You, as a developer, you sign the package with your own certificate, which can just be a simple test certificate. It doesn't need to be a real one. And you ship it up to Microsoft, and Microsoft re-signs that before they put it in the consumer store. So I suspect that same process will happen with MSIX, but it's still too early to tell. You know, we don't know what that process is going to look like. For things that you are going to deploy through other means, and MSIX, you don't have to do it through the consumer store. You've got the store for business, you have Intune, the next version of Config Manager. They said they're going to support delivery of modern apps, and that means AppX and MSIX. Those are things that are going to have to be signed, and signed with something that's trusted at that machine. That can still be your own you know, private cert, doesn't need to be a public cert, but you're probably better off just doing a public cert against it.
Right. Okay, another question is that that seems like Microsoft made it clear that AppV and MSIX will be serving different types of, will be different segments, like AppV is for enterprise and is only available on enterprise SKUs, and MSIX is more for consumer and server OSs. Is that going to change?
I would actually have phrased that a little bit differently. So AppV is only available on those enterprise and EDU SKUs. MSIX, we believe, I mean, it's not released yet, so anything could always change, but we believe it'll be available across all the SKUs.
Mm-hmm.
So I wouldn't say it's consumer only, it's for everything.
Got it. Okay, thanks.
So I did do some early testing. Now, I gotta caution you, this is extremely early testing. Microsoft hasn't even released anything, but I shared this information with Microsoft development team to give them an idea of what I was seeing. So I went through a number of applications which work great as MSIs, they work great with AppV, and I took them through the process of putting in an MSIX without the package support framework. And I know I haven't talked about that one yet, but I'll try to get there. And you know, this is kind of the results I'm seeing right now. So not a lot that we could really push out, and there were only 2 of those apps that I really felt I could push out in production at this point. But you know, this will improve over time. This is very, very early days, but kind of where we are. The issues that I saw were all across the board, some of which could be fixed in the tooling of doing the capture, and some of which have to be fixed in the platform, which means your operating system release. So over time, as we go forward, we'll see the tooling be able to get fixed quickly. But if you think about the operating system piece of that, you know, that's a 6-month release schedule unless we're talking about a security fix. Those issues will always take a little longer to resolve. I also got an opportunity to take a whole bunch of AppV packages and run them through a conversion. So it's a very early version of the converter. I don't think Microsoft expected me to do this one at all, but I ran through and I found you know, little different results here. A few things that are just early life issues with the converter itself, those 7 in the black where it just didn't convert at all. Those are easy things that I'm sure that they'll fix very quickly. But you know, we still aren't talking about being able to take these things and push out in production, even when it comes out in 1809 in the very near future. Okay, so let's talk about the package support framework. This is how we're actually going to fix a lot of the things that I see here. So we don't know how much of the API Microsoft is actually going to get into MSIX over the next few years, but some of the things that are there, we can fix ourselves directly using this package support framework. The way it works is that you're going to have your application inside the package here, but you're also going to add in a launcher program. So you have your shortcut go to this launcher. The launcher is going to bring in this environment. It's going to read this configuration file called the config.json file. Why they didn't do XML, I don't understand, because there's nothing web oriented with this, but fine, it's a JSON file. You edit that up and you tell the launcher what to do, and that will launch your application for you, but it'll also then be able to bring in these shims that you create to change the behavior. So these are shims that are going to intercept Windows API calls and fix things up for you. Not too unlike the way you end up fixing things with UEM products. where you say, hey, if something tries to write a file over here, write it over here instead. That's the purpose of a lot of these shims. This is an example of what that JSON file looks like. So it's pretty straightforward, where we're just saying, hey, here's the main executable I want to run. Here's the shims to bring in place. So they're asking in this case for a file redirection shim, and they're saying that, hey, if you see this pattern here under this folder, I want you to redirect that data. You know, it's as simple as that. So something that most IT people will be able to do at this level. But the shimming can go well beyond that. And so where we have people that have programming expertise, they can build their own shims and write their own custom shims. So these are the kinds of things that the tool vendors are going to be working on to provide you probably some premium shims to do more interesting things than what Microsoft provides themselves. If you get the package support framework, all of which is open source code under GitHub, these are the kind of things that you get. So this is the shim launchers for either 32 or 64-bit applications that you'd include. You need the runtime associated with it for the runtime DLL. And then this file redirection shim, which covers both file and registry redirection to some extent. There's also this trace shim, which is kind of interesting. The trace shim that's up there on GitHub is interesting, but not terribly useful. You have to run debug view, and the output is just horrible to read. But this is how you actually debug what's going wrong with my application. And I'm actually doing some modification to that. I have a project to upgrade the trace shim to output to the ETW event log, and then a viewer tool that looks kind of like this, which is it's designed to look like Procmon. So we're able to see the various API calls, kind of like an API spy, but more in a Procmon type of form, and see the actual requests coming out from the application. So why is that important? And let me just quickly pop through this set of slides here. Let me get it in the last state here so we have time. So this is our shim launcher. As you run that, it will then start the application on the basis of what you had in that config.json file, bring in this shim runtime DLL, which will reread that JSON file and bring in the shims that you registered in there. And so I've put the trace shim in this case, but this is where your file redirection shim would go as well. Msix has some standard shimming that it's doing itself. That happens inside, from what I can tell right now, in kernel-base.dll. And that's where things like copy on write and VFS checking and things like that get implemented, would be at the kernel base. And so if you load Procmon in, Procmon does monitoring down here inside the kernel of the operating system. And so we can run Procmon and we can run shimtrace. Shimtrace will show us exactly what the application asks for. And then Procmon will show us what's actually trying to occur down on the physical disk itself. And so this helps us to understand what types of file redirection or registry redirection changes that we kind of want to make at this level. Is that the last? I think that was. Okay. If I have, how am I doing on time? Wow. Yeah. Yeah, you really do want to see something, right? So let me quickly bring this up. I have a package that I created that's here. So this is my MSIX file. I have myself on in, what's the mode? It's not developer mode. Oh, what do they call that mode? You have to turn on here. If I go for developers, side-loaded apps, right? That allows me to load the file in directly. Now, in addition to double-clicking on the file to be able to do that, there's also a PowerShell interface. So to be able to, the equivalent of running the MSI installer with these files is going to be to run this PowerShell command with the file to install it. And we'll be able to have silent installs and things like that. So I've installed the application and it's come up, and this is what I would get without any shimming in place. This is a test application that attempts to, the installer creates files in all of the locations that an application might do things. In the current working directory, app data local, app data roaming, and under program data. And right now under MSIX, I only see some of these. It also wrote data into HKey current user and HKey local machine, and I'm not seeing all of that data as well. So these are the kinds of problems that we may well have to deal with. And this is kind of how we sort of figure out the way we would do shimming to make that work. So I'll bring up Trace Monitor here. And I do need to run that as administrator. Okay. And then I created the package with a shortcut that asks for the trace shim to be brought in place as well. Again, this is the modified version of my trace shim. I also fixed up a problem with the current working directory. So with these applications right now, the tooling is setting the current working directory to the system32 folder rather than the directory of the exe itself. And that's why it wasn't finding that particular file. But I still have problems with these. And the way that I would end up working this is I would be taking a look at the calls that are made to open up. So that's the current working directory one, which succeeded. And then this is where, scroll here. There we go. This is where it asks for the app data local and app data roaming. And so I can see exactly where the app was asking for it. And then if I went to the Procmon trace, which of course I forgot to turn on, but if I did, I'd be able to see where Msix redirected that call to and what its logic is, and to figure out where I need to make changes. So that's the concept going forward. As I said, we're going to see a lot of news on Msix. I expect here in the next month, with the support for the runtime will be built into 1809, it looks like. There's a bunch of sessions at Ignite. I'm sure it's going to be highlighted very big at the Ignite show. And they're really going to be making the push to get the software developers on board at that point. So I think that's where we're at. So Sam, do we have any questions? Oh,
sure.
Wow, look at that time.
Yep. Yep, just about out. So we'll quickly see how many we can get through. First question is performance. Is the performance better in Msix than it has been in AppV? What's the penalty for Msix?
Yeah, it depends. I've seen a couple of things that I've reported in to Microsoft on performance that are just special cases, but this is so early. In terms of overhead, I think the overhead is very similar to AppV. I mean, the AppV overhead is very small, you know, with some exceptions. There are some apps they're just weird and have some weird performance issues. But most of the apps, the performance impact from AppV is fairly negligible.
Okay.
And what I've seen in Msix, it kind of matches that.
Right. And the big question is, when will Msix be available on Windows Server and Windows 7?
Thank you for that. Yes. So Windows Server, the next release that comes out on Windows Server, of course, is Server 2019. So I'm expecting that there wouldn't be anything before that because the runtime piece is directly built into the kernel. As I said, you know, most of what I've been seeing in there happens there in the kernel base.dll that every application uses. We also have the drivers that live inside of the filter mode drivers. There's a WC IFS and WC NFS driver that's involved. So you know, this is part of the basics of the operating system. So I'm sure we won't see that until the 29 server comes out on the server side. As for Windows 7, that's a very interesting question. So at Build, Microsoft actually showed Msix running on Windows 7. And they have had a lot of questions about whether or not they would release support for that. They have not answered that question. I'm pretty sure they're thinking very hard about it. You know, if you think about Msix as actually not getting finished until probably the end of 2019, maybe 2020, maybe even later if they don't hold the schedules. You know, you're talking about end of life of Windows 7, so I'm not sure why you would bother. The reason that they would bother, in my mind, is because of the software vendors. You know, software vendors would love to be able to say, hey, I'll do my next version of release in Msix format as long as I can deliver it to everybody. And in the enterprise, a Windows 10 solution only makes a lot of sense for Msix. But in the consumer marketplace, anyone who hasn't upgraded their PC to Windows 10 yet is probably never going to do it until that machine dies. And those folks want to be able to continue to sell additional software to those folks. So they would then have to have both an MSI and an MSIX version of their new software to be able to support that. That would be the primary thing in my mind that would cause Microsoft to release the stuff for Windows 7. Because, I mean, you know, it's a bunch of work for them to do it. Yeah, they have something working, but to get it into release, that's a bunch of work. So, yeah. We'll see.
Well, so there are a couple of more questions, but I want to be considerate of everybody's time. So I think we're going to hand it back to Stephanie. And if anybody has any other questions, please enter them into the chat window and we'll get those answered for you as soon as possible. And all right, thanks a lot, Tim. Great information. It would be really nice if we could get maybe a further deep dive at some time in the future.
Oh, it'd be awesome. Love to do it.
Okay, thanks. Bye.
Yep, I was going to say that too. That was one of the comments that came up, Tim. I said, I'll have to set to work on him. All right, well, thank you so much. Thanks, Tim, for coming back to do another webinar for us. And thank you, Sam, for keeping an eye on those questions. And those that didn't get answered, I will send those over to Tim and we'll get some answers for you. Hi, Tim.
Hi, Tim.
And I put a couple links in the chat window for everyone. One's for a survey. It's short and anonymous and just for CUGC use. So we always like to get your feedback. So please fill that out. And also just a reminder to follow us on Twitter at MyCUGC. And finally, if you are not a member of your local group, get online at mycugc.org, find your group, become a member, go to the meetings. They're a lot of fun. We have big Excel events from time to time and spots around the country in addition to our local events. So get involved. We'd love to have you. And with that, I'm going to let you all get back to your day. I really appreciate your time for being with us. And again, thanks to Tim and Sam.
Okay. Thank you, Stephanie.
Thank you, Stephanie. And thank you, Sam.
Okay, absolutely. Have a great day, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.